Have you been conditioned? Let's make this interactive, shall we? Put a finger down if you feel like whatever you're doing needs to be productive or earning you money, or else you feel like you're wasting your time. Put a finger down if you feel like you can't rest until you've done enough to earn that rest. Put a finger down if you judge and shame yourself or others for needing to rest. Put a finger down if you ignore your body's signals and cues to rest, especially when your job or school or some other outer authority demands it, like going to work before you've fully recovered from an illness, for example. Put a finger down if you feel like some people's lives are inherently more valuable than others depending on their identity or how close they are to you. This includes beliefs like smart, able-bodied people are more valuable than cognitively or otherwise disabled people, your personal family is inherently more valuable than anyone else, you are more valuable than someone you've never met, etc. Put a finger down if you're afraid of asking others for help, perhaps because you think you'll be perceived as weak for needing help and not having everything figured out. Put a finger down if you think that feeling like garbage and hating yourself is a sign that something is inherently wrong with you, personally. Put a finger down if spending money on goods and services is one of your favorite ways to keep the existential dread at bay. Put a finger down if you believe that working really, really hard and spending as much time as possible working will lead to great financial rewards eventually. You know, because rich people are all hard workers who have been rewarded for their hard work. Put a finger down if you think someone being unemployed or poor is probably their own fault for not working hard enough. Or if someone's rich, that it's 100% they're doing. If you put down any number of fingers, and especially if you got more than like 5, congratulations, you've been a victim of capitalist conditioning and may be entitled to financial compensation. Just kidding. If only. Big if true. And if you got all 10, are you okay? Do you love yourself? But how can an economic system influence your ideology and what you believe and what you value and how you behave? Surely it can't be that powerful. I mean, aren't our personalities and opinions and actions and values our own and not the result of some incorporeal outside force that has nothing to do with any of those things? Does the invisible hand of the free market truly dictate who I am as a person? There's no way. Well, actually, in a way, yeah. And this video will explain exactly how that capitalist conditioning works, what that conditioning looks like, and how to move away from it. 1. How does capitalism condition us? As we established, it's pretty likely that at least some of your beliefs and behavior have been shaped in a very particular way simply because you live under a capitalist economic system. And that capitalist economic system incentivizes and rewards certain things, like rugged competitive individualism and exploitation of others for your own personal gain. To understand capitalist conditioning, we need to define capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system where private individuals own the means of production, basically the land, facilities, factories, resources, etc., required to perform labor. These privately owned means of production can also be called private property or productive property. Contrast this with socialism, or the collective ownership of the means of production. Under socialism, there is no private property because workplaces are owned and run democratically by the people working there, rather than by just one person or a board of directors or whatever. It's very likely that you also have zero private property, just like any individual in a socialist system, but the difference is you live under capitalism, most likely. Your own personal home or vehicle or toothbrush is personal property. Don't worry, no one wants to take your toothbrush. Unless it's a really nice one. No, I'm just kidding. Most people living under capitalism are not actually capitalists, as they don't own any private productive property. In part because if everyone was a capitalist, you'd have no workers left to perform labor. Also, I doubt that any capitalists watch my videos. That just seems statistically extremely improbable, so I'm guessing you personally are not a capitalist. If you support capitalism without earning money from owning productive property, you are just a bootlicker. No tea, no shade. Since you are probably not a capitalist living under capitalism, that means that you are either a worker who sells their labor to a capitalist for a wage, a self-employed small business owner who maybe doesn't own any private productive property but makes money from selling goods or services to a clientele, or part of the surplus class because you don't work for whatever reason. Which means you, by definition, are not part of the capitalist ruling class who gets to structure society. As George Carlin said, it's one big club and you're not in it.
The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your retirement money. They want it back. so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club.
You're not invited. Sorry, pal. You do, however, live in a world where the dominant ideology is one that upholds the capitalist ruling class and capitalism itself. The economic system that we live under can also be referred to as the economic base. The economic base encompasses everything related to production, namely the means of production, so like what factories, tools, facilities, raw materials, etc. even exist, and the relations of production, or who has access to those means of production. The economic base basically deals with who owns the means of production and how property and capital are distributed. The economic base gives rise to an ideological superstructure encompassing everything not directly related to production, like art, culture, family, religion, science, politics, law, media, education, and so on. Despite not being directly related to production, the ideological superstructure basically normalizes the relations of production and the economic base, because ideology is like the water we swim in. You can't really see it because you're swimming in it. Everything's ideology. Unless you do the work of constructing the ideology that you've absorbed through osmosis, which you, unless you've done the work, are very likely unaware that you've absorbed it through osmosis, your ideology will likely be one that supports the status quo by default. This is the case no matter what the economic base is. We just happen to live with a capitalist economic base. The economic base and ideological superstructure shape and maintain each other in a cyclical process. Most things that arise within the ideological superstructure uphold, solidify, and perpetuate the economic base. Of course, every single system will have its critics who create media that critiques that system, but the majority of media is not that. Again, this is going to be the case with any economic system. We just happen to live under capitalism. In the capitalist US, for example, the military budget is the highest in the world at $2.08 trillion, and a lot of the US's wealth, its capital, comes from waging wars abroad. This is how US defense contractors make a lot of money. The way the US earns capital via war is part of the economic base. Also, fun fact, according to the United Nations World Food Program, you only need an annual investment of $40 billion per year to end world hunger by 2030. So basically 6 years of feeding people can be covered by 11.5% of the US military's annual budget. Anyway, it makes logical sense to make such a significant part of the economic base look good, reasonable, and justified, despite the fact that spending money on the military rather than on improving people's lives and spending money on murdering people to steal their resources for as cheap as possible are not good things, which, like, I hope isn't a controversial take at all. I mean, it really shouldn't be. And because of this, if you want to make a movie that features the US military, their bases, or their equipment in some capacity, the film studio making that movie is required to consult with the Department of Defense, get their approval, and change anything the DoD deems inappropriate, and in return, the film studio can get access to military facilities, equipment, and personnel for their movie. Basically, if you want to make pro-military propaganda in the US, you can get it heavily subsidized by the government. If you make a movie meant to critique the military in any capacity, however, perhaps by mentioning something like how the US is so rich, in part because ongoing wars are very profitable, your movie will absolutely not be subsidized by the US military. This military entertainment complex is an example of the interaction between the economic base and the ideological superstructure that arises and reinforces that economic base. The capitalist economic base, which relies on waging imperialist wars to earn profits, gives rise to a superstructure that justifies waging those imperialist wars, which further reinforces the economic base. And it makes logical sense that a country that makes the majority of its profits from war would subsidize films that frame those wars as justified. And I mean, in 1943, the CIA's precursor, the Office of Strategic Services, circulated a memo stating that cinema is one of the most powerful propaganda weapons at the disposal of the United States, and recommended the voluntary cooperation of all motion agencies not under the control of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So the use of movies as a propaganda tool has been a thing since at least World War II in the US. We in the US just don't really realize how much propaganda we have here, which is by design. As Dwight D. Eisenhower declared in 1953, the hand of government must be carefully concealed, and in some cases, I should say, wholly eliminated, and that a great deal of this particular type of thing would be done through arrangements with all sorts of privately operated enterprises in the field of entertainment, dramatics, music, and so on and so on. This is basically the definition of cultural hegemony, a term first coined by Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci, referring to how the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, maintain rule in capitalist societies through ideological and cultural means. If a system incentivizes and financially rewards doing whatever it takes in order to increase your profits regardless of the human or environmental cost, it's only logical that the ruling class will do whatever it takes to increase their profits no matter the human or environmental cost. It's also only logical that the majority of media in such a society will uphold the dominant ideology, that of the ruling class, by default. There's plenty of other examples showing the relationship between base and superstructure, but I figured the US's military entertainment complex is the most obvious. If you have other good examples of the base and superstructure going brrrr, feel free to drop them in the comments below. 2. What does capitalist conditioning look like? Okay, so all of us who live under capitalism have been propagandized, whether we're aware of it or not. But how does that actually show up in people's values and behaviors? According to Marxist sociologist Dr. Erik Olin Wright, under capitalism, we are effectively taught to uphold the values of competitive individualism and privatized consumerism. Competitive individualism refers to a set of values arising from the fact that under capitalism, companies must compete against each other to attain the highest market share and earn the highest profits. Again, no matter the human or environmental cost, because profit matters above all else. Because of this, individuals living under capitalism tend to measure their self-worth through comparison with others, view independence from others as morally good, stigmatize dependence on others, and strive for success even when it's at the expense of others. The value of privatized consumerism leads those of us living under capitalism to believing that our life satisfaction is dependent on ever-increasing personal consumption. Instead of focusing on the well-being of entire communities, we are focused solely on our own ability to consume, which makes us view things like access to housing as a factor of personal consumption rather than a public good and a human right, which it really should be. Basically, under capitalism, we are conditioned into valuing independence over interdependence and prioritizing ourselves over others, even if it's at the expense of others. This disrupts solidarity among the working class, and because we aren't guaranteed basic rights like food and shelter, many people live in constant fear of losing their livelihood and house and healthcare and everything connected to that. Unless you're outside the US and have healthcare by default, as most countries do. Also, under capitalism, we are often incentivized to work as much as possible, regardless of whether our body minds can keep up. The US, for example, doesn't have federal sick leave laws, so if you're sick and can't afford to take time off to recover, you are quite literally incentivized to work, even when it's wrecking your body, or potentially wrecking other people's bodies if your illness is contagious. Because sometimes the alternative to that is not being able to afford to live. And that's why under US capitalism, we love that grind set. We love that grind set. We love pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps. I'm so bootstrap pilled. Grind set maxing. As mentioned in the 10 fingers activity in the beginning, all of this can show up as being afraid to ask others for help, working when you're sick, engaging in consumerism to attempt to feel better, valuing some lives more than others, depending on how much shareholder value they produce, not being able to rest, shaming yourself and others for resting, and believing that an individual's material conditions are entirely a product of their own actions and decisions, and that you just need to make enough good personal decisions to become part of the capitalist ruling class. Which is not actually how it works. Shaming and hating yourself is also a product of capitalist conditioning because it is very profitable to have a society of people who shame and hate themselves and who think that the solution to their self-hatred is the individual consumption of goods and services. If you hate yourself, you obviously don't benefit from that, because all it does is stress you out and make you feel bad. But capitalism definitely benefits, especially if you're a member of a marginalized group. You're just internalizing the capitalist conditioning about the group you're a part of against yourself. Don't do that. You can hold yourself to a standard and be productive without hating yourself, and in fact, it actually works better than hating yourself into productivity. I don't think I need to explain why the aforementioned things are bad for you, but I will anyway. All of the aforementioned things lead to stress, which is known to be really, really bad for you. Not having a community, not feeling like you can rely on anyone, hating yourself, viewing others as competition, not understanding or acknowledging our collective interdependence, not being able to rest, not listening to your body's cues to rest, shaming yourself and others and the like are quite literally bad for your physical being. And you only get one body, so you should probably be nice to it. Or like as nice as your particular situation allows, at least. You're not gonna hate yourself into getting rid of capitalism, buddy. 3. So what can we do about it? The first step is always awareness. There's not really like a silver bullet for this, especially because it's not like we choose to be conditioned. It just kind of happens from existing. Like, all of this conditioning would be way easier to undo if we were consciously like, yes, I would like to allow myself to believe things and behave in ways that align with and uphold the current economic system. It'd be really convenient if we had a choice in that. But alas, we do not, and it is not that easy. But a good start is awareness and self-knowledge. In general, if you want to stop being impacted by your capitalist conditioning, or like any other conditioning for that matter, you need to admit to yourself that some of the things you believe or value, or some of the ways that you behave even, might have been put in your head by someone else and doesn't reflect who you truly are. If you want to expunge the parts of yourself that were put there by capitalism, and that don't actually reflect what you truly value, you also need to know who you are and what you personally value. Friendship, cooperation, knowledge, truth, beauty, love of humanity, art, science, the destruction of all settler colonial states and giving the indigenous people their land back. What would a world prioritizing what you value look like? I saw a great TikTok the other day from Meredith St. John that I'm just going to paraphrase, but she talks about how to realistically opt out of capitalism by recognizing that the things you dream about that you think would only be attainable for you if you were rich or famous or whatever are actually obtainable right now, but you've just been conditioned by capitalism into thinking that they're only attainable if you have a certain level of privilege.
They've created the American dream to keep us focused on this like fictional universe where we are rich and we are famous and everything works out and I can finally go to the dentist. The reason why it's so effective is because it instills hope. Now it's like, what do I have to hope for? What's going to keep me going? I am still pretty relatively powerless. So what do I do about that?
She also gives a journal prompt. Write down what your goals and desires are, no matter how unrealistic or materialistic, and the feelings that attaining those goals would give you. Why do you want those feelings? What else can give you those feelings?
The whole point is to make you realize that like this fictional materialistic universe that you are living in that leads you to worship obsolescence and the wealthy is actually really obtainable to you right here, right now. If you were allowed to give yourself dignity for your work and you were rewarded for the hard work and all of the hours that you put in, you probably wouldn't feel the need to be rich and famous and whatever.
Do you want to be famous or own a fancy BMW so you could have a feeling of accomplishment, or to look cool to others? Do you want a lot of money to provide for your family, to feel financially secure and stable, to feel like your work is valuable, so you can have more free time to spend doing fun things, to feel like you're good enough at something to be rewarded for it? And what else can give you those same feelings? What kind of world would need to exist for those feelings that you are looking for to not be scarce? That's the kind of world you should be working towards, and you can begin by acting as if that world already exists. Thanks for watching. This video was made possible by my amazing subscribers. I couldn't have gotten this new microphone and lighting setup without you guys, so thank you to all who contributed to that. I send you all my love. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and share it with a friend if you feel compelled. A friend who needs to undo their capitalist conditioning. I post new videos every other Sunday, and if you want to support my work, you can send me a one-time donation on Ko-fi or PayPal, and if you want to support me on a recurring basis, well, guess who has a Patreon now? Me. And that's where all my uncensored ad-free videos will live from here on out, if you want to hear me say words that are too naughty for YouTube. Anyway, see you in the next video. Bye for now!